Hello malt mates, I'm Ralphie. This is the Whiskey Bothy. This is Ralphie Review 1070, and I am currently involved in a series of 4 reviews of young distilleries of various ages in Scotland, and one from England, and just what they're basically introducing to the lineup of options available to Scotch whisky buyers. This is my second return to Loch Lee, and there's a reason for that, and I'll come to it shortly. This is the Sowing Edition third crop. It is completely unpeated. It is 100% first fill ex-bourbon cask matured, and it's also been bottled at 40, give me a second, I already knew it but I forgot, 46%. I would also add that it's stating clearly in the label that it is natural colour and unchill filtered, which many of the more successful new distilleries are doing to differentiate themselves from the more brand-led products that are engineered for passive consumers who don't want too much flavour in their whisky. That, by the way, was just my opinion. Don't take what I say as expertise. It's not supposed to be. I'm fortunate in because I buy everything I review out of my own pocket with the help of my Patreon subscribers and a little bit of Google advertising revenue. I'm able to maintain some reasonable independence because I quite value that. I've been enjoying this. Let me tell you more. I like Lowland single malts. This is a recent arrival to the Lowland single malt scene. The distillery is a converted farm in the region of Ayrshire in the southwest coast of Scotland, and they are using primarily their own grown barley for making their whisky, which means that their new make spirit tends to be engineered towards flavour rather than alcohol yield. So they're getting a bit more flavour because they're getting a bit less alcohol yield because they are sowing, harvesting and conditioning and milling their indigenous neighbourhood barley, which is cold growing barley. So it's probably going to give a slightly lower starch yield, but a little bit more of a flavour yield. That's because that's the way it works. I have reviewed Loch Lee before because I do like Lowland whiskies, particularly as they start to get a little bit older and they've been matured in delicate, unassertive casks. However, I bought this bottle because I really enjoy occasionally some young, completely spirit-driven single malts, which is what we've got here. This is the, just to kind of remind me again, the Sowing Edition third crop. So it's approximately 6-year-old. Do not get into the habit of thinking that younger whisky is not as good as older whisky. And I'm going to give you a very simple reason for this. If young whisky has been well made in the stills, it's got lots of barley grain derived flavours and sensations which are maintained more easily at a younger age. Furthermore, as the whisky gets older, it should get a little bit better in a good cask, but I can assure you, if it's in a bad cask, it will only get worse. So we need to be aware of that. So what have we got here? 100% fresh first fill bourbon casks. So you have quite an aggressive cask engagement with the spirit. And I must say, I'm enjoying this natural colour. natural colour, unchill filtered, 46%. It doesn't have an age statement, but if you're a Lochleaf fan, you'll soon figure it out using the formula. So approximately 6, maybe 7 years old. What have we got in the nose? It's light. Very typical of lowland whiskies. Light, more delicate and complex. We're not talking any sort of monsters here. We're not talking peat monster, sherry monster. This is the other side of the spectrum for Scotch whisky. And one of the things that I enjoy is the diversity of what I buy within the Scotch whisky scene. So I'll have a bottle of heavily peated whisky, but beside it I'll have a bottle of this, which is not peated at all. And it's a completely different flavour experience. Occasionally, if I'm just feeling a little bit in the mood for it, I might even add a drop of the peated whisky to the unpeated whisky just to see where it goes. And if you feel like blending yourself, why not? You've bought the bottle and you're going to get a fascinating experience in terms of smell and taste from just mixing them up just a little bit. But we'll take this on its own. On the nose, light and creamy, very soft lemon, and soft, almost green apple. It's not quite green apple, it's more a slightly unripe russet apple. There's a little bit of tartness on there, so I'm getting on the nose a touch of lemon rind. There are some flavour suggestions on the back of the bottle, but to be honest, I've had a read through them and I think they're just a little bit fanciful. So I'm just going to I'll mention one to you, just for a laugh. I don't know who makes up their tasting notes, but I think they've got a pretty solid imagination here. Here we are. It's finishing with some fresh grassy notes and warm straw. Warm straw. I've never actually come across warm straw in whisky, ever. But there again, I've never tasted warm straw. But you'll find it lying about in barns during the summer. So really, this descriptor is the approximation of reference to a presumption that we have some idea of what warm straw would be. I'm not convinced. They're also mentioning rose petals in here. No, I'm not getting any of that. What I'm getting is a fairly typical, fruity, full-flavoured, light lowland Scotch single malt, which is still very young, but it's interesting because it's spirit dominant. Sure, there's a great big thick chunky layer of vanilla running through this, which is slightly inhibiting the dynamics of the spirit signature itself, but I'm not too worried about that. It didn't cost too much, so there wasn't a massive premium in this. And the question I normally would get at this point is, you know, Ralphie, is it worth buying a young single malt without an age statement when there's other age-stated single malts that are definitely older and they're the same price, if not a little bit cheaper? And my answer's simple. It's personal preference. But think about it this way. The more we diversify what we're buying in terms of bottles of whisky, the more we are creating an opportunity for our nose and our palate and our taste to actually get the sheer diversity of what's available in Scotch whisky, particularly in the single malts. The creaminess is kind of growing a little bit more barley sugar at the moment, which is encouraging. This is really down to the dominance at this young age of the barley grain itself, and it really helps the fact that it's locally grown, because it's providing a little bit less alcohol but a little bit more actual flavour, and importantly, with a more indigenous barley variety growing in colder climates, producing less starch that can be consumed, can be turned into alcohol, what you get is a little advantage there, because if there's less starch to be turned into alcohol, there is more of the rest of the grain which is available, including the proteins and even the husk itself, to provide flavour. and sensation along with the flavours. First taste. Oh, dominated by sour. Fresh, zesty and sour. It's soft sour, but it's intense soft sour. You really notice after the slightly creamy, vanilla-dominated arrival that there's a little bit of sort of bitter herb in there. Say a little bit of sage, for example, very mild. A little bit of peppermint in there, just mild. But you've got this surge in what you'd call lemon rind, lemon juice and lemon rind, without it being oppressively or obviously lemon. At this stage, as you know if you're regular viewers, we're going to add a drop of water, and by the way, it will be a drop. I've added 2 millilitres. One mistake I've already made with this whisky is I've gone in with a full teaspoon of 5 millilitres into the glass. And to be honest, it didn't drown the whisky, it just suppressed the sensation of the sour and the bitter and the citrus. So it kind of slightly swamped it. This is a delicate whisky. There's no getting away from it. It really has benefited from being all first fill ex-bourbon casks, in which there is without doubt some residual bourbon still in those casks. You can taste it. There is a slight bourbon note. So 2-3 millilitres of water, that's where you're going to start. And something else I've noticed is there will be some Scotch mist to develop, but you really got to be patient. It doesn't happen particularly quickly. So this tells me that the engagement with the fresh bourbon casks has been modest. The spirit hasn't gone particularly deep into the wood. If we were to come back to Loch Lee in 2 years' time, when it's heading towards 10 years old, well, 3 years' time, when it's heading towards 10 years old, I think we'll see more Scotch mist because there's more oils and more adds coming out of the cask. What do I mean by adds? I'm talking about there's protein in wood. There are other chemicals in wood which contribute to the misting of the dram when we add water. I've not added that much water either. That's another factor. It's still just slightly under 46%. If I'd added a lot of water, it would mist up. You'd see that Scotch mist a lot more quickly. Now, that's giving you this information's given me a bit of time just to let the water blend itself in with the whisky, and in doing so, it's starting to chase off more of the flavour onto the nose and certainly onto the palate. It'll be more refined and well defined in terms of the delivery. Also, I'm expecting that dominant soft sour note to be a little bit more suppressed. On the nose, we continue to get that aquavit of malted barley. There's no harm in that. It's really quite refreshing. This is what I would definitely class this as a summertime out in the garden style of single malt. It's not one I'll be drinking every day, but it's definitely quite a useful contrarian style of whisky to be sitting amongst the standard bottles. A touch of oak coming through now. Typical standard American oak. I think the distillery is going to have to keep a real close eye on their casks, because with modern American ex-bourbon casks, the oak can become too astringent in a fairly short space of time. It's not there yet, but the oak impact is going to be happening definitely when it's 10. Absolutely. It's going to taste probably more like a 12 or 14-year-old without the refinements. Another taste. It's more like it. Sharp. Grapefruit citrus. A touch of chilli in there, but it blends and it bonds well with the rest of the flavours. There is slight spearmint note in the background. The vanilla is starting to weaken as the spirit itself, particularly adding a bit of water, rapidly re-exerts itself over the influence of previous content from the casks. It's nice to see the suppression of that vanilla note because it was a little bit too dominant to start with and it left the whisky a little bit monotone. However, times are changing now because it's been 10-15 minutes in the glass. One final taste before the malt mark. They talk about rose petals in the tasting notes. There is a slight rose note in there, but it's soft pink rose oil, not rose petals. And it's not your typical rose note. It's not Turkish Delight. It's more, a little bit more refined, a little bit more subtle. I'm also noticing in the background a little touch of soft cinnamon, a little tiny tot of ginger. I tend to get ginger a lot from whiskies, but that's my personal palate. That's just the way it is. So there you have it. A brief introduction to Loch Lee. If you're just into whiskey and you've been around whiskey for a couple of years, I'm not going to recommend this bottle. Stick to the better known, more established bottlings and the independent bottlings. This one, from a small distillery, is really designed for the true fan, the aficionado, someone who's adopted that distillery as their go-to, but also someone who has got a fairly advanced palate, who is looking for the refreshing nature of a very competent, well-made lowland Scotch whisky option. And there you have it. I'm going to give this a mark now. $81 out of 100. Perfectly competent. I do recommend this whisky. But only if you're a big spender. Looking at the price for what is still a young whisky, there are better options out there, and it's something that the distillery itself really needs to keep in its sights. Young distilleries which are growing up and producing interesting spirit need to engage and connect with their fans who are making and taking the time to buy their product. And therefore they should be careful with the pricing. There are already I can think of 2 small independent distilleries that have literally blown themselves out the water with crazy pricing for young whiskies. They're looking over £100 for 3 or 4 year old whisky per bottle. That's crazy stupid. They have been stupid, and I think they're still, years later, recovering from that mistake. So good luck to Loch Lee. What I can say is that it's a hands-on distillery. One of the major plus points is that they're growing their own barley. Local barley is increasingly important to whisky drinkers because it adds to, not just to the provenance, but it quite literally adds to the flavour, because you're getting a slightly reduced alcohol yield, and therefore by default you're getting a slightly higher flavour yield, including the sensation intensity that goes with those flavours. This is a lovely sensation-rich, refreshing, zesty, almost sherbety whisky. But I'm enjoying it. I'm glad I bought the bottle, and perhaps in 3 or 4 years' time, I'll buy another one. And there you have it. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.